The morning started before sunrise, just like every other day in the hospital. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, and the long hallway lights hummed softly as they flickered awake. Outside, the city was still quiet, but inside the hospital, the day had already begun. Nurse Clara adjusted her mask and rubbed her eyes as she stepped into the nurse's station. Her shift had barely started, yet she already felt behind. The night staff was supposed to finish the paperwork for 2 new admissions, but they hadn't. Charts were left half-filled, and monitors beeped in the distance. She sighed deeply and began sorting through the files. Every day felt like a race against time. There were never enough nurses, never enough rest, and never enough patients. Clara had been working here for 8 years, and in that time she had seen it all. Angry relatives, crying children, endless emergencies, and sleepless nights. Somewhere along the way, she had learned to put up walls around her emotions just to survive. A junior nurse named Beth rushed past her with a stack of blankets. "Room 5 needs help," she said breathlessly. The new patient's blood pressure dropped again. "I'm coming," Clara replied automatically, grabbing her clipboard. She moved quickly, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Inside the room, a frail elderly man lay half-conscious, his breathing uneven. A young doctor stood beside him, adjusting the IV drip. "Get another saline bag ready," the doctor ordered. Clara nodded and worked efficiently. Within minutes, the man's condition began to stabilize. The monitor beeped rhythmically again, and a sense of calm returned to the room. The doctor gave her a small nod of approval before moving on to the next patient. It was only 8:15 in the morning. Clara checked her watch and exhaled. The waiting area outside was already filling up. Parents holding sick children, elderly people clutching their prescriptions, and a few impatient visitors scrolling through their phones. The front desk phone rang nonstop, and one of the receptionists looked seconds away from tears. "Another busy day," muttered one of the orderlies as he wheeled a cart past her. "Always," Clara replied. As she headed toward the triage area, she noticed a woman standing quietly near the entrance. She looked to be in her late 40s, neatly dressed but not fancy, plain gray coat, simple shoes, and a small bag hanging from her shoulder. She didn't look like the usual patient or visitor. She was just standing there, scanning the reception area as if she were studying how things worked. Clara frowned slightly. The hospital had strict visitor policies, especially in the emergency wing. Nobody was allowed to linger near patient areas without permission. "Excuse me," Clara called out as she approached. "Can I help you with something?" The woman turned, her expression calm but alert. "Oh, hello," she said with a warm smile. "I'm here for a quick visit. I'd like to have a look around the emergency department if that's all right." Clara blinked. "A look around?" "Yes," the woman said, still polite. "Just to see how things are running. I won't get in the way." Clara immediately assumed she was one of those curious visitors who thought hospitals were open to tours. She'd seen it before. People wandering in, asking odd questions, taking notes, sometimes even pretending to be part of management. Once, a journalist had tried to sneak in to get a story about long waiting times. Clara wasn't about to let that happen again. "I'm sorry," Clara said firmly, "but this area is for authorized personnel and patients only. If you're visiting someone, you'll have to check in at the front desk." The woman nodded, still calm. "I understand. I just thought, well, I wanted to see how the morning rush was handled." "I'm actually—" Clara interrupted before she could finish. "Ma'am, please, this is not a place for sightseeing. We have sick people here, and it's been a very busy morning. If you don't have an appointment or someone to visit, I'll have to ask you to wait outside." There was a brief silence. The woman's smile faded slightly, but she didn't argue. "All right," she said softly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "It's fine," Clara replied curtly. "Please step outside. You can speak to the reception desk if you have any official matter." The woman gave her a short nod and turned toward the exit. For a second, Clara felt a small twinge of guilt. Something about the woman's calm eyes and gentle tone made her seem harmless. But there was no time to think about it. The intercom buzzed again. "Nurse Clara to room 3, please." "Nurse Clara to room 3. She spun on her heels and hurried away. Room 3 was chaos. A teenage boy with a fractured arm was crying while his mother tried to comfort him. The cast technician hadn't arrived yet, and the painkillers hadn't kicked in. Clara did her best to calm them down, explaining each step of the process. She was patient this time, gentler even, but the woman's face from earlier lingered in the back of her mind. Who was she? By the time the morning passed, Clara had dealt with 3 emergencies, a broken machine in the supply room and 2 complaints from waiting patients. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, and she hadn't had a sip of water since she clocked in. At noon, she finally found a moment to sit in the break room. The smell of reheated food filled the air, and a small TV in the corner played the news on low volume. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and tried to block out the sound of constant beeping from the hallway. "Rough morning?" Beth asked as she sat across from her, peeling an orange. "When is it not?" Clara muttered. Beth laughed lightly. "True, did you hear? There's supposed to be some sort of inspection coming up. Maybe even today." Clara's eyes opened. "Inspection again?" "Yeah, something about the new director. People say she's doing surprise visits to see how things really run. You know, unannounced checks and all that." Clara shook her head. "I'll believe it when I see it. Every few months they say the same thing. It's always some rumor to make us behave better." Beth shrugged. "Maybe. But this time they said she might come without telling anyone, like undercover." Clara chuckled tiredly. "Undercover? What is this, a movie? Directors don't have time for that." They both laughed, but deep down a faint unease stirred in Clara's chest. She thought about the woman from earlier. The quiet confidence, the way she looked around the department like she was taking notes. Could it be? No, that was ridiculous. She brushed the thought away and focused on her sandwich. A loud crash outside made everyone in the break room jump. A supply cart had tipped over in the hallway, spilling syringes and gauze everywhere. Clara was on her feet before anyone else, already back in work mode. "Watch your step," she called out as she helped pick things up. The orderly apologized repeatedly, but she just waved him off. "It's fine. Just clean it up quickly before someone slips." The rest of the day continued in a blur. More patients arrived. More phone calls came in, and Clara's voice grew hoarse from giving instructions. Somewhere between handling a medication order and checking a monitor, she forgot about the mysterious woman entirely. By early evening, when the shift finally started to slow down, Clara leaned against the counter and looked out at the waiting area. The woman was gone, of course, but the spot where she'd stood earlier still felt oddly vivid in Clara's mind. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was just guilt. Maybe she'd been too harsh. But rules were rules, and she'd only been doing her job. The next morning, when Clara returned for another long shift, a buzz of excitement filled the hospital corridors. People were whispering near the elevators, and the atmosphere felt charged. "Did you hear?" someone said near the nurses' station. "The new director is here today. She's been walking around different departments all week." No one knew until she introduced herself. Clara froze, her heart giving a tiny jolt. "The director?" she asked quietly. "Here, today?" "Yeah," said a technician nearby. "I think she's already been through the East Wing. She's doing these surprise evaluations, checking how staff interact with patients, how clean everything is, that sort of thing." Clara forced a smile, but her stomach tightened. For the rest of the morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Every time someone new walked through the doors, she glanced up, wondering if that was her. Every time a staff member mentioned management, she listened carefully. At one point, she even caught Beth whispering to another nurse, "You remember that woman from yesterday? The one Clara told to leave? I swear she looked important. Maybe that was her." Clara's heart skipped. "No way," she muttered under her breath. It couldn't be. But a part of her wasn't so sure anymore. The day dragged on with the usual mix of stress and exhaustion. But there was something heavier in the air now, a quiet tension that followed Clara through every corridor. The patients came and went, the machines beeped, and the phones kept ringing, but underneath it all was the whisper of a rumor that wouldn't go away. And though Clara tried to dismiss it, deep down, she knew that sometimes life had a strange way of teaching lessons when you least expected them. That night, as she finally clocked out and walked toward the exit, she paused at the same spot where the woman had stood the day before. The entrance doors slid open with a soft hiss, letting in the cool evening air. For a long moment, Clara just stood there, staring at the empty space and replaying the encounter in her mind. She had been tired, yes, overworked, stressed, and short-tempered. But something about the woman's calm voice and patient eyes stuck with her. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't argued, hadn't demanded attention. She'd just left quietly, as if she knew she didn't need to prove anything. Clara sighed and shook her head. Forget it, she told herself. Just another busy day, but the truth was, she couldn't forget it, because sometimes, the smallest moments, the ones that seem unimportant at the time, are the ones that end up changing everything. And this one, though she didn't know it yet, was about to change her life in ways she never could have imagined. The next morning started with the sound of rain tapping gently against the hospital windows. The gray sky made the fluorescent light seem even harsher, and the hallways smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet clothes. Nurses hurried in and out of rooms, their voices low but urgent. It was the kind of morning that made everyone move a little slower, and yet the hospital never truly slowed down. Clara arrived earlier than usual. She hadn't slept well. The memory of the woman from the previous day still lingered in her mind. She tried to push it aside, convincing herself it didn't matter, but something about the encounter had unsettled her. She didn't like feeling uncertain, especially at work, where control and order were everything. As she hung her coat in the locker room, she overheard two nurses talking near the door. "Did you see her?" one whispered. "The director? She was in the maternity ward this morning, just walking around like a regular visitor." "Yeah," said the other. "I heard she doesn't announce herself at all. Just shows up and watches how staff treat people." Clara froze mid-motion. The word director echoed in her mind. She turned slightly, pretending not to listen, but every word reached her ears. "They say she's really calm," the first nurse continued. "Doesn't raise her voice, just observes. If she sees something wrong, she'll address it later, privately. Apparently she's very professional, but very sharp." Clara swallowed hard. Calm, observing, sharp. That description fit the woman she had spoken to yesterday. Perfectly. She took a deep breath and told herself not to panic. There was no proof it was her. The hospital had hundreds of visitors every week. She couldn't start imagining things. Still, as she walked out to start her shift, her eyes darted around the hallways more than usual. Every unfamiliar face made her heart skip a beat. By 9 a.m., the emergency ward was buzzing again. 2 car accident victims had just been brought in, a young mother was crying in the corner, and a new intern was struggling to take a patient's vitals. Clara slipped into her usual rhythm, efficient, fast, in control. She gave orders, adjusted machines, and answered questions all at once. The chaos gave her a strange comfort. When she was working, she didn't have time to think. In the middle of all this, a quiet voice broke through the noise. "Excuse me." Clara turned sharply. For a moment, her stomach twisted, but it wasn't the same woman. This time, it was an elderly lady holding a folder. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to explain that she was here for a follow-up appointment. "Do you have your paperwork?" Clara asked, keeping her tone even. The woman nodded, fumbling with her bag. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, slightly damp from the rain. Clara scanned it and realized the appointment was scheduled for the afternoon, not the morning. "I'm sorry," Clara said, softening her voice. "You're a bit early. The doctor you're supposed to see isn't here yet. You can wait in the lobby if you like." The woman looked disappointed but nodded. "I didn't want to be late. The buses don't run often where I live." Clara felt a small pang of sympathy. She took a quick look at the crowded waiting area. There were no empty seats. For a moment she hesitated, then gestured to a chair behind the reception desk. "Here," she said. "You can wait here for now. It's warm and quiet." The woman's eyes brightened. "Thank you, dear." As Clara helped her settle down, she caught a few surprised looks from her coworkers. Clara wasn't exactly known for being gentle. Usually she was all business. But something about the past day had made her think twice about how she spoke to people. Still, the morning went on without much time for reflection. Around midday, a man in a maintenance uniform walked past the nurse's station, pushing a ladder and toolbox. Behind him, another woman followed, wearing a plain white coat, clipboard in hand, and a calm, watchful expression. She didn't seem like maintenance staff. Clara noticed her immediately. The woman stopped near the reception area and spoke quietly to one of the clerks. She smiled, nodded, and looked around the ward as if she were taking mental notes. Clara's throat went dry. It was her, the same woman from yesterday, the same gentle voice, the same calm eyes. She was back. Clara's mind raced. Should she go over and apologize? Pretend nothing happened? What if it really was the director and she recognized her? What if she had already reported the incident? Her heart thudded in her chest as she tried to act natural. She pretended to check a patient's chart, though her hands trembled slightly. From the corner of her eye, she saw the woman move slowly down the hallway, greeting staff, observing rooms, taking short notes on her clipboard. Beth leaned in and whispered, "That's her." "That's the director. She's visiting all the wards today." Clara's stomach dropped. "You're sure?" "Positive," Beth whispered back. She just introduced herself in pediatrics. The head nurse nearly fainted. Clara's face burned. Yesterday, she had told that same woman to leave the hospital. She had spoken to her like a trespasser, even raised her voice. And now she was walking calmly through the department as their boss. She felt sick. Trying to keep her composure, Clara focused on her tasks, but her thoughts were spinning. Every time the director's footsteps approached, Clara's breath hitched. When she finally entered the emergency ward, time seemed to slow down. The director smiled at a patient in the corner, asked a few questions to the interns, and watched the nurses as they worked. She didn't raise her voice, didn't interrupt, just observed quietly. When her gaze met Clara's, the world seemed to stop. The director held her eyes for a brief second, long enough for Clara to know she remembered. There was no anger in her expression, only calm understanding. That made it worse somehow. Clara quickly looked away and busied herself with the nearest task, pretending to adjust a monitor that didn't need fixing. Her heart was hammering in her chest. After a few minutes, the director moved on, leaving the ward just as quietly as she had entered. The tension slowly lifted, but Clara could barely breathe. She escaped to the staff lounge the moment she could, leaning against the counter with shaking hands. Beth followed her inside a few minutes later. "You okay?" she asked. Clara nodded weakly. "Fine. You don't look fine." Clara hesitated, then sighed. "You remember that woman I told to leave yesterday?" Beth blinked. That was her, wasn't it? Clara didn't answer, but her expression said everything. Beth covered her mouth, half shocked, half impressed. "Oh no, what did she say?" "Nothing," Clara replied. "Not a single word. She just looked at me. Maybe she doesn't remember." "She remembers," Clara said quietly. I could see it in her eyes. For the rest of the day, Clara worked in silence. Every interaction, every word she spoke to a patient felt heavy with awareness. She caught herself softening her tone, explaining things more patiently, smiling when she usually wouldn't. It wasn't out of fear of punishment. It was something deeper. She kept thinking about how easily she had judged someone based on their appearance. By the time the evening came, exhaustion hit her hard. She sat down at her desk to finish paperwork, but her mind wasn't on the forms. She thought about the director's calm expression, about how she hadn't yelled or embarrassed her even after what happened. That quiet composure had more power than any lecture could have. When she finally clocked out, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The rain had stopped and the smell of wet pavement filled the parking lot. She looked up at the hospital building, its windows glowing softly in the dark. Inside those walls, she had spent years running from one crisis to another, building a reputation for efficiency and control. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten something important. She had forgotten what it felt like to truly see people, not just treat them. The next morning, Clara arrived early again. She wanted to face whatever was coming. If the director wanted to talk about what happened, she wouldn't hide. At exactly 9, a message came through the internal system. All department heads and nursing staff, please assemble in the main conference room at 10 o'clock. The announcement made her pulse quicken. She didn't need anyone to tell her who had called the meeting. By the time she entered the conference room, the place was packed. Nurses, doctors, and technicians filled the rows of chairs. There was a low hum of nervous whispers as everyone waited. At the front of the room stood the same woman, now clearly and confidently identified as the hospital's new director. She was speaking softly with one of the senior doctors, her clipboard tucked under her arm. When she turned to face the room, the noise faded instantly. Her voice carried calm authority as she began to speak about patient care, teamwork, and compassion. Clara sat near the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Each word felt like it was meant for her, even though the director didn't once look in her direction. She spoke about how every patient who walks through the doors deserves respect, regardless of how they look or what they say. She talked about how true care isn't just about treatment, but about humanity, small gestures, kind words, and patience in the busiest moment. There were no accusations, no blame, just truth. When the meeting ended, staff slowly began to file out, murmuring to one another. Clara stayed seated, frozen. She didn't know if she should approach the director or wait for her to speak first. Before she could decide, the director's assistant approached her quietly. "The director would like to see you in her office," she said. Clara's heart pounded. She followed the assistant down the hallway, her hands trembling slightly. When they reached the office, the assistant knocked softly, then stepped aside. "Come in," said the calm voice from inside. Clara entered, closing the door gently behind her. The director was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-streaked glass. When she turned, there was that same serene expression, neither angry nor cold, just steady. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt heavier than words. Clara took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "Yesterday I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I thought you were someone trying to break the rules." "I was wrong," the director nodded slowly. "You were doing your job," she said simply. "But sometimes doing our job isn't enough. Sometimes how we do it matters just as much." Clara looked down. "I understand." "I believe you do," the director said, her tone gentle. "And that's why I want your help with something." Clara looked up confused. The director smiled slightly. "We're starting a new training program on patient communication. I'd like you to be part of it. Your experience here can teach others a lot, both the good and the not so good." Clara blinked, surprised. "You can't want me to help?" "Yes," the director said simply. "You have strong leadership skills. What you need now is balance. Learn from this and help others do the same." Clara felt something shift inside her, a mix of relief, gratitude, and shame all at once. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. As she left the office, her steps felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like just another overworked nurse. She felt human again, and even though the lesson had been hard, she knew she'd never forget it. The next few days passed quietly in the hospital, but something had changed. The usual buzz of noise and rushing footsteps was still there, but the mood felt lighter somehow. People smiled a bit more, spoke a bit softer, and even the patients seemed to notice. It was as if the whole place had taken a deep breath after a long, tense moment. Clara moved through her shifts with a new kind of awareness. She was still strict, still precise, still fast when she needed to be, but there was a gentleness in her now, something people hadn't seen before. It wasn't that she had suddenly become warm and chatty. It was simpler than that. She had started to listen again. When patients asked questions, she no longer brushed them off with quick answers. When new nurses hesitated, she didn't snap at them. And when families got upset, she tried to understand why instead of just reminding them of the rules. At first, it felt strange. For years, she had trained herself to keep emotions locked away. It was easier that way, or at least she had thought so. But now she realized how much energy it had taken to keep that wall up all the time. One morning, as she was checking charts near the nurses' station, the director's assistant approached her again. "The director would like to meet with you this afternoon," she said. Clara's heart skipped. Even though their last meeting had gone well, the memory of that first misunderstanding still made her nervous. "Did she say what it's about?" "She wants to discuss the training program," the assistant replied with a polite smile. "She said you'll be working closely with her." Clara nodded, trying to hide her surprise. Working with the director felt surreal. Just a week ago, she had been scolding her for walking into the ward without permission. Now she was being asked to help shape a program that would affect the whole hospital. When the time came, she walked to the director's office with steady but cautious steps. The office was simple but elegant. Large windows overlooking the city, a potted plant in the corner, and a shelf lined with books about healthcare and leadership. The director sat behind her desk reviewing a few papers, then looked up with that familiar, calm smile. "Good afternoon, Clara," she said. "Come in." Clara took a seat. "Good afternoon. I wanted to thank you," the director began. "I've been observing the ward since our last meeting. I've noticed a difference, not just in you, but in your team. You've managed to influence them quietly without even realizing it." Clara blinked, surprised. I just tried to be more careful." "Exactly," the director said. "Small changes spread faster than orders from above. When people see genuine effort, they follow it." Clara nodded slowly, taking that in. The director continued. "The training program I mentioned isn't just about communication. It's about culture, how we treat each other, not just patients. I want to include real stories from staff who've learned through experience. And I believe your story could inspire others. Clara felt her face warm. My story? Yes, the director said gently. You made a mistake, but you learned from it. That's more powerful than pretending to be perfect. Clara looked down at her hands. I'm not sure I'd know how to talk about it. I'll help you, the director said kindly. We'll start by planning a small workshop. Nothing formal at first, just a group of nurses sharing what they've learned on the job. You can help lead it. Clara hesitated. Do you really think people would listen to me? The director smiled. They already do. You just haven't noticed yet. That afternoon, Clara walked out of the office feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not just responsibility, but real purpose. For years, she had worked long hours, followed every rule, and done her best to keep things running smoothly. But now, for the first time, she felt like her experience actually mattered. The following week, preparations for the workshop began. Clara worked with 2 other senior nurses and a few younger staff members. Together, they gathered examples of difficult situations they had faced with patients and visitors. The idea was to talk about what went wrong, what they learned, and how things could have been handled better. During one of their meetings, a young nurse named Lena spoke up shyly. Sometimes I get scared to talk to families, she admitted. When they start yelling or crying, I freeze. I don't know what to say without making it worse. Clara looked at her with empathy. You're not alone, she said. We've all felt that. You don't always need the perfect words. Sometimes just standing there listening makes more difference than you think. Lena smiled faintly, as if those words had lifted a small weight off her shoulders. Moments like that made Clara realize how much she had changed. A few months ago, she might have told Lena to toughen up or stay professional. Now she understood that kindness didn't mean weakness, it meant connection. When the day of the workshop arrived, the conference room was filled with nurses, doctors, and administrative staff. The director sat in the back, listening quietly, letting the team take the lead. Clara stood at the front, holding a few notes but hardly looking at them. She spoke honestly about her experience, the stress, the exhaustion, the way frustration can cloud judgment. She didn't mention the director directly or what had happened between them, but she described the lesson she had learned, that every person who walks into the hospital, whether patient or stranger, deserves the same respect she would want for herself. As she spoke, she noticed a few heads nodding. Some people looked thoughtful. Others looked guilty, as if remembering their own moments of impatience. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, the rest joined in. Clara felt her throat tighten. It wasn't about applause, it was about understanding. They all shared the same struggles, the same long hours, the same moments of frustration. For once, she didn't feel alone in it. After the session ended, the director approached her. You did well, she said softly. That was real. People needed to hear it, Clara smiled modestly. Thank you. I just told the truth. That's exactly why it worked, the director said. Over the next few weeks, the training program grew. Other departments started joining in, sharing their own stories and suggestions. The hospital began to feel more connected, less divided by rank or role. One afternoon, Clara was making rounds when she overheard a patient speaking softly to another nurse. Everyone here's been so kind lately, the patient said. It feels different somehow. Clara smiled quietly to herself. But change never came without challenges. Not everyone liked the new approach. Some older staff members grumbled that the hospital was becoming too soft, that things were too focused on feelings. One of the senior doctors even muttered, We're not here to hold hands, we're here to treat people. Clara didn't argue. She just kept doing her work the way she believed was right. And slowly, even the skeptics began to notice the difference. Patients were calmer. Complaints dropped and staff cooperation improved. One evening, as Clara was finishing her shift, she received a message from the director's office asking her to stop by before she left. When she arrived, the director was sitting by the window again, reading a letter. She looked up and gestured for Clara to sit. I just received a message from the health board, the director said with a faint smile. They've noticed the changes in our hospital. Fewer patient complaints, higher satisfaction ratings, and better staff feedback. They're impressed. That's wonderful, Clara said sincerely. The director nodded. It's a team effort, but I want you to know, you played a big part in that. Clara felt a warmth rise in her chest. I just did my job. No, the director said. You did more than that. You reminded everyone what this job is really about. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the city faint in the background. Then the director added, You know, when I came here, I didn't plan to start all this so soon. But sometimes the right lessons come from the most unexpected places. Clara smiled slightly, realizing what she meant. After she left the office that night, she stopped by the break room. A few nurses were sitting there laughing over a small birthday cake someone had brought. The sound of their laughter filled the room in a way that used to be rare. Hey, Clara, one of them called out. Come join us. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled and walked over. For once, she didn't rush off to finish paperwork or check on something else. She sat down, accepted a small slice of cake, and listened to their stories. As she looked around the room at the tired but smiling faces, the shared warmth, the small flickering candle, she realized that the hospital didn't feel like just a workplace anymore. It felt like a community. The lesson she had learned from that one mistake had rippled outward, touching more people than she could have imagined. And though she still worked long hours, still dealt with emergencies and frustrations, she carried herself differently now. One night, after a particularly long shift, Clara walked through the quiet corridors alone. The lights were dim and the sound of distant monitors echoed softly. She stopped by the window at the end of the hall and looked out over the city lights. It struck her how far she had come. A few months ago, she had been so focused on efficiency that she'd forgotten compassion. Now she understood that one could not exist without the other. Behind her, a soft voice spoke. Long day? She turned. It was the director. Always, Clara said with a small laugh. The director smiled. You've done good work. I'm proud of what this place has become. Clara looked out the window again. It feels different now. People care more. I think they needed a reminder. The director nodded. Sometimes that's all it takes. They stood there quietly for a moment. Two women who had started on opposite sides of a misunderstanding, now sharing the same purpose. As the night deepened and the city lights shimmered below, Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew there would always be hard days, but she also knew she'd never face them the same way again. Because sometimes the most important lessons don't come from books or training manuals. They come from mistakes, humbling, uncomfortable, human mistakes that open the door to growth. And for Clara, that one small encounter, the one she had almost forgotten, had changed everything. Weeks turned into months, and the changes in the hospital became part of everyday life. What had started as a small workshop now shaped how people worked and treated one another. The atmosphere was different, not perfect, but warmer. People laughed more often, helped each other without being asked, and even the patients seemed to feel it. The hospital no longer felt like just a building full of rushing people and machines. It felt like a place where kindness was quietly growing. Clara still worked long shifts, but her days didn't feel as heavy anymore. She had found balance. Some days were still chaotic and she still got tired, but she no longer went home with that feeling of being completely drained and disconnected. She had learned to slow down, to breathe between the noise. One morning she arrived early as usual. The sky was still pale with the first light of dawn, and the hospital corridors were quiet except for the soft hum of cleaning machines. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stood by the window near the nurses' station, watching the city slowly wake up. Morning. Clara, a voice said behind her. It was Lena, the young nurse she had once comforted during training. She was smiling, holding a stack of papers. We got the new patient satisfaction reports. Want to see? Clara nodded, taking the papers. As she scanned through the numbers, her eyebrows lifted slightly. These are good, she said. Really good? Lena grinned. I know. The director's going to be happy. Clara smiled back. It was hard not to feel proud. For the first time in years, the hospital's feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Patients mentioned how kind the nurses were, how clean the rooms felt, and how the staff listened to them with patience. Later that day, the director stopped by the emergency ward. She wasn't there for an inspection this time, just a visit. She walked with her usual calm grace, greeting people as she passed. When she saw Clara, her smile widened slightly. I read the reports, she said. Excellent progress, Clara nodded modestly. Everyone's been working hard. The director tilted her head. You've been guiding them, haven't you? I just remind them what matters, Clara said softly. The director gave her a thoughtful look. I'm planning something new, she said. A mentorship program for new nurses. I want you to lead it, Clara blinked. Me? Yes, you've become a quiet leader here. People trust you. The idea felt big, almost too big. Clara had never seen herself as a mentor. But she also remembered how lost she had once felt. How easy it was to burn out when no one was there to guide you. Maybe she could be that person for someone else. I'll do it, she said finally. Over the next few weeks, Clara began meeting with new nurses after their shifts. They sat in a small conference room with tired faces and cups of tea, talking about what it really meant to work in a place like this. She didn't give long lectures. Instead, she listened to their stories, their fears, their frustrations, their small victories. One evening, a new nurse named Hannah spoke up. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for this job, she said quietly. When the ward gets busy, I feel like I'm drowning. Everyone else seems to handle it better. Clara nodded slowly. You're not alone in that feeling. Every single person in this room has felt the same way. The trick is to remember that you're not just treating bodies, you're helping people. And that includes helping yourself. Hannah looked at her, eyes soft with relief. That night, as the young nurses left, one of them turned to Clara and said, Thank you. You make it sound okay to not be perfect. Clara smiled faintly. That's because none of us are. The mentorship program grew quickly. It wasn't fancy or complicated, but it worked. The new nurses felt supported and the senior staff began to find pride in teaching again. The director often attended the meetings quietly, sitting at the back, observing with that same calm expression she always had. One afternoon, as Clara was preparing patient reports, she heard her name over the intercom. Nurse Clara, please report to the director's office. Her first thought was that something serious had happened. She hurried upstairs, trying not to imagine the worst. When she arrived, the director was sitting at her desk, looking at a letter. Come in, she said. Close the door. Clara obeyed, a small knot forming in her stomach. The director smiled faintly. Nothing's wrong, she said, as if reading her thoughts. Quite the opposite, actually. I've just received a message from the Regional Health Board. They've noticed our improvement and want to feature our hospital in their upcoming publication about healthcare leadership. Clara's eyes widened. That's amazing. It is, the director agreed. And they want to include your story. My story? Yes. The transformation that began here started with a single moment of misunderstanding. They want to highlight how humility and growth can lead to real change. Clara hesitated.
The idea of her story being shared publicly made her uncomfortable.
I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't want it to sound like I was some kind of hero. I wasn't. The director smiled gently. That's exactly why your story matters. It's honest. People relate to honesty more than perfection. After a long pause, Clara nodded. All right. If it helps others, I'll do it. A few days later, a journalist came to the hospital to interview her. They sat in a quiet room with a recorder on the table. The journalist asked simple questions about her work, her team, and what had changed over time. When she asked about the moment that started it all, Clara hesitated. I made a mistake, she said finally. I judged someone too quickly. I thought I was protecting the rules, but I forgot the reason we have them. To care for people. That moment taught me more than any training ever could. The journalist nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes. And how did it feel to realize that the person you had turned away was your own director? Clara smiled a little. Humbling. But I think we both learned something that day. She taught me compassion through her calmness. I taught her how hard it can be on the ground when things get chaotic. In the end, we met in the middle. When the article was published a month later, it spread far beyond the hospital. People from other healthcare centers sent messages saying how the story inspired them. Some even started their own workshops on empathy and communication. The hospital received visitors from nearby towns who wanted to see how the staff worked. The director often gave tours, introducing Clara as one of the key people behind the change. Clara never got used to the attention, but she accepted it with quiet grace. She didn't see herself as special, just someone who learned the hard way and decided to do better. One day, after another long shift, she was sitting in the staff lounge with a cup of tea when the director walked in. You look tired, the director said kindly. I am, Clara admitted, smiling weakly. But it's a good kind of tired. The director sat beside her. That's the best kind. The kind that comes from purpose. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the vending machine filling the air. Then the director spoke softly. You know, when I first came here, I wasn't sure how people would accept me. I thought I had to prove myself by finding mistakes. But you reminded me that leadership isn't about catching people doing wrong. It's about helping them do right. Clara looked at her, touched by the honesty. And you reminded me that kindness isn't weakness, she said. It's strength in disguise. The director smiled warmly. I think we taught each other well. That evening, Clara left the hospital and walked home through the quiet streets. The sunset painted the sky in soft orange and pink, and the air felt cool against her face. For the first time in years, she didn't rush. She walked slowly, taking in every sound. The distant hum of cars, the laughter of a child, the rustle of leaves at home. She sat by the window with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened since that morning. She told a stranger to leave. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Back then, she had seen the hospital as a battlefield, something to survive each day. Now she saw it as a place of second chances, not just for patients, but for everyone who worked there. Weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the hospital to celebrate the recognition they had received. Staff members gathered in the main hall, sharing food, laughter, and stories. The director gave a short speech thanking everyone for their dedication. When she mentioned Clara's name, the room erupted in applause. Clara stood awkwardly at first, her cheeks warm, but then she smiled and waved. After the ceremony, one of the younger nurses came up to her. You know, she said, you've changed the way I see this job. I used to think being a nurse meant following rules and staying tough. Now I understand it's about people. Clara smiled softly. That's what I learned too. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Clara stayed behind to tidy up a few things. As she walked through the now empty hallways, the sound of her footsteps echoed softly. She passed by the emergency ward where it had all begun and paused at the entrance. For a moment, she saw it all in her mind. The busy morning, the frustration, the stranger she hadn't recognized. She smiled faintly and whispered to herself, "Thank you." The lights dimmed automatically as she turned to leave. Outside, the stars were faint but visible. She stood in the parking lot, breathing in the cool night air, feeling grateful, not just for her job, but for the journey that had taught her to see people again. She didn't know what the future would bring. There would be hard days, new challenges, maybe even more mistakes. But she wasn't afraid of them anymore, because she had learned that mistakes could be gifts if you were willing to learn from them. And she had learned that kindness, even in the smallest moments, could ripple further than she'd ever imagined. The hospital had grown quieter that night. The long day had finally ended, and most of the staff had already gone home. The lights in the hallway were dim, and only the faint sound of machines and soft footsteps echoed through the building. Clara sat by one of the windows near the nurse's station, her cup of tea slowly cooling in her hands. She watched the reflection of the city lights through the glass and let her mind wander. So much had changed since that morning when she had told a stranger to leave. The memory was still clear in her mind, her tired voice, her frustration, her certainty that she was right. And then the shock that came when she realized who that woman really was. It felt like another lifetime, but in truth it had only been months. She smiled faintly to herself. Sometimes life had a strange way of teaching lessons. You never saw them coming, but they changed everything once they arrived. A soft sound pulled her out of her thoughts. The elevator doors opened and the director stepped out, holding a small folder in one hand. She spotted Clara and walked over with her usual calm grace. "You're still here?" the director asked kindly. Clara nodded. "Just finishing up some notes." The director smiled and took the seat beside her. "I was going through the reports for next month. We've had record patient satisfaction again." "That's good to hear," Clara said. "It's more than good," the director replied. "It's proof that all the effort, the training, the mentoring, the culture shift, it's working. You've helped shape that." Clara looked down, feeling a quiet pride warm her chest. "It's everyone, not just me. People started caring again. That's what made the difference." The director studied her for a moment, then said softly, "You know, when I first came here, I didn't plan to stay long. I thought I'd come in, review things, make changes, and move on to another branch. But this place, it feels different now. It feels alive." Clara smiled at that. "It's the people." They've all been through so much, but they never gave up. The director nodded, setting the folder aside. I'm glad I met you, she said suddenly. That day, though it wasn't easy for either of us, it was exactly what this hospital needed. Clara chuckled softly. You mean the day I kicked you out? The director laughed, the sound warm and light. Yes, that one. I still remember the look on your face when I walked into the conference room later. You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Clara laughed too, shaking her head. I think my heart actually stopped for a second. They sat in silence for a moment, both smiling, both remembering how far things had come. After a while, the director spoke again. Clara, there's something else I wanted to tell you. The Regional Health Board reached out again. They're starting a new initiative, one that focuses on compassion-based healthcare. They want someone from our hospital to represent them. Clara looked up in surprise. Who? The director smiled gently. You. Clara blinked, her mouth opening slightly. Me? Why? Because you're living proof of what compassion can do. You've changed this place, not through authority or position, but through example. They want you to speak at their annual meeting next month. To share what you've learned. Clara felt her stomach tighten. The idea of standing in front of strangers and giving a speech made her nervous. She wasn't someone who liked the spotlight. She had always preferred being in the background, doing her job quietly. I don't know if I can do that, she said softly. The director leaned forward. You can. Just speak from your heart. That's what you've always done. Clara hesitated, but the director's steady eyes gave her courage. All right, she said at last. I'll do it. The following weeks passed quickly. Clara spent her evenings after work preparing notes for her speech. She didn't want it to sound like a lecture. She wanted to tell a story, something real that others could connect to. But every time she tried to write, she struggled to find the right words. One night, she sat at her kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. The clock ticked softly, and the room was filled with the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She picked up her pen and began writing. I used to think being a nurse was about following rules. I thought that if I did everything by the book, I would be doing my job well. But I learned that rules mean nothing if we forget the people behind them. The words began to flow, simple and honest. She wrote about the day she had told the director to leave, about how embarrassed she felt, about how that moment forced her to look at herself in a way she never had before. She wrote about how her colleagues had changed, how the patients had changed, and how kindness had started to fill the spaces where frustration once lived. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. She read the pages slowly, her eyes stinging with quiet emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was true, and that was enough. The day of the meeting arrived faster than she expected. The event was held in a large hall filled with doctors, nurses, and administrators from different hospitals. The director was there too, sitting in the front row with a reassuring smile. When Clara's name was called, she walked to the podium, her heart beating fast. The lights were bright, and for a moment she felt small. But then she looked out at the crowd and saw faces, tired, kind, curious faces. People just like her. People who worked hard, cared deeply, and sometimes forgot why they started. She took a deep breath and began to speak. At first, I didn't know what compassion really meant, she said, her voice steady but gentle. I thought it was something you showed only to patients. I didn't realize it also meant showing kindness to your coworkers and to yourself. I learned that the smallest act of understanding can change the way someone feels about their work, their day, even their life. As she continued, the room grew quiet. People listened closely, not because she was famous, but because her words were real. She spoke of exhaustion, of mistakes, of how easy it was to lose empathy when the pressure never seemed to end. And then she spoke of how one act of forgiveness, one second chance, had changed everything. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness. Then the audience began to applaud. It started softly, then grew into something strong and full of warmth. Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. She glanced at the director, who was smiling proudly, eyes shining. After the event, many people came up to her to thank her. Some shared their own stories, times when they had lost patience, moments when they had felt invisible. Clara listened to each one, realizing how many people carried the same quiet struggles she once had.